The divorce papers trembled in my hands as I watched my husband's face, smug, confident, careless. "Take your belongings and leave," he said, already glancing toward the woman standing behind him. She smiled like she'd won. What neither of them realized was that every single thing in that house belonged to me. The walls. The furniture. The art. Even the bed they stood beside. So I smiled back, not from grief, not from regret, but because tomorrow, they would learn the truth. And empty houses don't lie. That I didn't find out the way women do in movies. There was no lipstick on a collar, no late-night phone call, no dramatic confession. I found out because he stopped hiding her. Because one evening, he came home with a calm that didn't belong to a married man, sat across from me at the kitchen island, and said my name the way people do when they've already made a decision. "Can we talk?" he asked. That's when I knew. He didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. He didn't even look ashamed. He told me he'd been unhappy for a while, that he'd met someone who understood him, and that things had just happened. Each sentence landed softly, rehearsed, like he'd practiced them in the mirror while I paid the bills and cooked dinner in this same house. Then he did something worse than cheating. He brought her in. She stood a few steps behind him, arms folded loosely, eyes roaming over the room like she was already rearranging the furniture. She was younger than me. Sharper. Smiling too easily. She looked at me the way people look at an obstacle they've already stepped over. "This is her," he said, as if introducing a new phone instead of the woman he'd replaced me with. I waited for anger to rise. For my voice to shake. For tears to betray me. Nothing came. Instead, I noticed small things. How his shoulders relaxed now that the truth was out. How she leaned closer to him, confident, territorial. How neither of them asked how I felt. "I think it's best if we end this quickly," he continued. "No drama. No fighting." Then came the sentence that changed everything. "You can take your belongings and go." He said it gently. Reasonably. Like he was being generous. I looked around the room, the floors, the walls, the art, the life I had built, and finally understood something he didn't. He thought he was sending me away. But in that moment, he had just given me permission to let him destroy himself. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't need to. Her confidence filled the room before her name ever could. She stood there like someone who'd already unpacked, like the house had accepted her before I ever had. Her eyes moved slowly, deliberately, over the furniture, the artwork, the tall windows catching the late afternoon light. Appreciation. Calculation. Ownership, all mixed into one look. She smiled at me then. Not a kind smile. Not an apologetic one. It was the smile of someone who believed the ending had already been written. The smile of a woman who thought she'd taken something valuable from someone disposable. I wondered if she noticed how carefully chosen everything around her was. The leather sofa. The custom shelves. The light fixtures he once called too expensive when I picked them out. "I didn't expect you to be so calm," she said lightly, breaking the silence. Like my composure disappointed her. Neither of them noticed my hands resting on the counter, steady. They didn't see the quiet curiosity forming behind my eyes. She was waiting for tears. For questions. For proof that she mattered more now. Instead, I studied her. She wore confidence like borrowed jewelry, flashy, temporary, loud. She leaned into him when she spoke, fingers brushing his arm, staking a claim she didn't realize wasn't his to give. He watched her with admiration, like he'd upgraded his life instead of detonated it. "I'll give you two some time," he said to me, already choosing her again. She nodded, satisfied, then glanced around once more. "It's a beautiful home," she added. "You must have loved living here." The word must stung, past tense, assumption baked in. I met her eyes and smiled, small and polite. Yes, I said. I still do. She didn't understand the weight of that sentence. She thought I was clinging. Remembering. Mourning. What she didn't realize was this: people who truly lose something don't smile that way. And people who truly win don't need to look around to prove it. The next morning, the house felt different. Quieter, but not empty. He moved through the rooms with purpose, like someone already rewriting the story in his head. Cabinets opened. Drawers closed. He spoke as if the decision had aged overnight into something reasonable and final. We should be practical about this, he said, standing near the staircase. There's no reason to drag things out. She sat at the kitchen table, scrolling on her phone, legs crossed, comfortable. Too comfortable. Like she'd slept there. Like she already knew where the coffee mugs were kept. You can take your belongings today, he continued, still not looking at me. Clothes, personal items. Whatever you need. Whatever you need. The phrase was wrapped in kindness, but it was really a limit. A line drawn by a man who believed generosity meant letting me leave with dignity while he stayed behind with everything else. I waited for him to explain what he meant by belongings. For him to clarify. He didn't. She finally looked up. I'll help pack, she offered, smiling, as if this were some shared project. A bonding exercise over boxes and tape. Something shifted in me then, not anger, not sadness, clarity. I walked slowly through the living room, letting my fingers trail along the edge of the bookshelf, the smooth surface of the dining table, the art frame I'd waited 6 months to have custom made. He watched me, misunderstanding the pause completely. Take your time, he said. I don't want this to be uncomfortable. Uncomfortable. I turned back to him and nodded. I won't take long. That seemed to satisfy him. He thought compliance meant defeat. He thought silence meant surrender. He thought this was the part of the story where I shrank. What he didn't see was me inventorying something far more important than furniture. I wasn't deciding what to take. I was deciding what to leave behind, temporarily. As I reached for my coat, she stood and whispered something into his ear, laughing softly. He smiled back, relaxed, victorious. 2 people convinced the worst was over. Neither of them realized that sentence, "Take your belongings," would be the last moment he ever spoke to me from a position of power. And by the time he understood what he'd given away, there would be nothing left to argue over at all. People always imagine heartbreak as something loud. Screaming. Crying. Hands shaking so badly you can't breathe. I'd done that kind of pain before, years earlier, when I still believed love was something you could earn by sacrificing yourself. This time was different. This time, the hurt arrived already tired. I didn't argue because arguments require hope. They require the belief that the other person might still listen, still care, still choose you if you say the right thing. I'd watched him choose her without hesitation. There was nothing left to negotiate. I didn't cry because tears would have fed the story they were already telling themselves. That I was emotional. That I was unstable. That I needed comfort they had no intention of giving. I refused to perform grief for an audience that had already moved on. And I didn't beg because begging turns dignity into a bargaining chip. It hands power to someone who has already proven they don't respect it. Instead, I observed. I noticed how he avoided my eyes, like looking at me too long might remind him of something inconvenient. I noticed how she kept glancing at the walls, the floors, the space around us, not at him, like she was memorizing her new territory. I noticed how neither of them asked what I wanted. Silence gave me something they didn't expect: time. Time to think. Time to remember. Time to let the truth surface without emotion drowning it out. I remembered every signature I'd signed. Every wire transfer. Every contract he never read because he trusted me to handle the boring stuff. I smiled once, just slightly. Not because I was okay, but because I finally understood the game I'd been playing without realizing it. They mistook my calm for weakness. But calm isn't surrender. Sometimes, it's strategy waiting for the right moment to move. Everyone always assumed the house was his. Friends, family, even the neighbors who waved when he pulled into the driveway after work. He had the louder presence, the confident stride, the habit of talking about our home like it was an extension of his success. I never corrected them. It was easier to let the story stand than to explain how quietly wrong it was. When we bought the house, people congratulated him first. He shook hands, accepted compliments, joked about finally making it. I stood beside him, smiling, while no one asked who signed what, who wired the money, who sat up late comparing interest rates and negotiating terms. That work was invisible by design. I'd made it that way. He liked to say he provided stability. I let him believe it because it made him feel needed. Meanwhile, I handled the parts that actually held us together, the planning, the paperwork, the risk. When something broke, I fixed it. When bills arrived, I paid them. When decisions needed to be made, I made them quietly. The house reflected that balance. The clean lines. The custom finishes. The art chosen not to impress, but to last. He enjoyed the result without ever asking how it came together. To him, it was just there, like the way some people treat love, permanent, unquestioned, guaranteed. Even his family spoke as if I'd married into comfort. His mother once joked that I was lucky to have found a man who could take care of me. I laughed politely, swallowing the truth because correcting her would have embarrassed him. What no one saw was how often I'd protected him, from financial mistakes, from impulsive decisions, from himself. I'd built security around us so seamlessly that he mistook it for his own strength. Standing in that house after he told me to leave, I finally saw the irony clearly. He believed he was evicting me from his life. In reality, he was standing inside something that had always been mine, even before he ever thought to claim it. The house didn't come from his promotion or his confidence or the way he liked to tell stories at dinner parties. It came from numbers. From planning. From choices made long before he ever imagined leaving me. While he talked about dreams, I built foundations. Years earlier, I'd received an inheritance after my father passed. Not the kind that changed your life overnight, but the kind that demanded responsibility. I didn't spend it. I didn't talk about it. I invested it carefully, growing it slowly, treating it like something sacred. He knew about it, vaguely. Enough to dismiss it as handled. When we started house hunting, I insisted on putting more down. He didn't argue, he was relieved. I negotiated the price. I covered the closing costs. I paid the inspection fees without mentioning them again. He trusted me to take care of the details, and I did. Thoroughly. The deed was written clean and intentional. My name first. His included, but protected. Clauses he skimmed. Pages he never read past the signatures. He joked about how boring legal language was. I smiled and let him skip ahead. Every major upgrade came from my accounts. The renovations he bragged about to friends. Funded by bonuses I earned quietly. The emergency savings he liked to reference when he felt responsible. Built by me, untouched by his spending habits. I wasn't hiding anything. I was just used to being underestimated. By the time the house was finished, it wasn't just a place to live. It was a structure of intention, legally, financially, strategically mine. I had planned for every possible outcome except betrayal. Even then, protection had found its way into the margins. Standing there, listening to him talk about what I could take, I realized how deeply he misunderstood the life we shared. He thought love meant trust without verification. He thought partnership meant ownership by proximity. What he never understood was this: I didn't build that home out of romance. I built it out of foresight. And foresight doesn't disappear when love does that. He always said paperwork gave him a headache. Contracts, agreements, anything longer than a page, he trusted me to handle it. "You're better at that stuff," he'd say, already reaching for his phone. I never corrected him. I just made sure everything was done properly. When we signed the prenuptial agreement, he laughed through the meeting. Joked with the attorney. Told her he didn't need protection because we were solid. He skimmed the pages, signed where he was told, and squeezed my hand like it was a formality instead of a safeguard. I remembered that day clearly as I stood in the hallway now. The way the lawyer had paused, asked if he had questions. The way he waved her off. "I trust my wife," he'd said, proud of his certainty. Trust isn't the opposite of preparation. I knew that. He didn't. The document was specific. Property purchased with separate assets remained separate. Contributions were traceable. Ownership was defined in black ink, immune to memory, immune to emotion. The house fell squarely within those lines. Later came the addendum, the one tied to my inheritance, the renovations, the accounts I maintained solely in my name. He'd signed that too, distracted, confident, unaware that protection often looks boring until it becomes necessary. I walked into the home office and opened the locked file cabinet. Inside, everything was exactly where I'd left it. Deeds. Statements. Contracts. Originals, copies, digital backups. Quiet proof waiting patiently. He thought legality worked on vibes, on who slept where, who paid last month's utility bill, who felt more entitled in the moment. He didn't realize that courts don't care about feelings. They care about facts. And the facts were stacked neatly in my favor. That's when I understood something that made my hands steady instead of shake. I didn't need to convince him of anything. I didn't need to argue or explain or defend myself. All I had to do was let him keep believing what he already believed, right up until the moment those papers spoke for me. That night, I walked through the house with empty hands. No boxes. No suitcases. No frantic sorting of a life reduced to piles on the floor. I moved slowly, deliberately, letting the quiet settle into the corners of every room. In the bedroom, my clothes still hung neatly in the closet. Dresses I'd worn to celebrations he barely attended. Shoes placed carefully, untouched. I didn't reach for any of them. Taking things would have meant accepting his version of the ending, that I was leaving with scraps of a life he allowed me to keep. Instead, I straightened a picture frame on the dresser and turned off the lamp. In the kitchen, the scent of coffee from that morning still lingered. My favorite mug sat by the sink. I washed it, dried it, and placed it back where it belonged. Not as a goodbye, but as a reminder, to myself, that nothing here was being abandoned. She watched me from the doorway once, confused. "You're not taking anything?" she asked, her voice trying to sound casual. "Not tonight," I replied. He didn't question it. He thought I was in shock. Thought reality hadn't hit yet. People love explanations that make them feel powerful. I grabbed my coat, my phone, and my keys. The essentials. The things that were undeniably mine no matter what story he told himself later. As I reached the door, he cleared his throat. "We can talk tomorrow," he said, almost kindly. "Once things settle." I turned back and met his eyes for the last time inside that house. "There's nothing left to discuss," I said. The door closed behind me with a soft, final click. In the car, I sat for a moment without starting the engine. The house glowed behind me, warm and confident, completely unaware of what was coming. He thought I'd left without a fight. What he didn't realize was this: you don't pack when you're planning to return with authority. You leave everything exactly where it is. So no one can pretend it ever belonged to them. That I didn't have to be there to know how that night unfolded. I could picture it too clearly, the way relief would have settled over him once the door closed behind me. The way victory feels quiet at first, almost polite, before it grows loud. She moved in immediately. Not officially, not on paper, but in presence. Her shoes by the door. Her shampoo in the shower. Her laughter filling rooms that had once echoed with routines I built. He probably told her she could make herself at home. She believed him. They celebrated in small ways at first. Takeout on my dining table. Wine poured into glasses I'd chosen. Music played through speakers I'd installed. Each moment reinforced the same lie, that the hardest part was over. She took pictures. Of the living room. Of the bedroom. Of herself leaning against walls she assumed were now part of her future. I imagined the captions already forming. New beginnings. Fresh starts. Finally happy. Confidence is easy when consequences haven't arrived yet. He watched her with pride, convinced he'd escaped something heavy. I knew that look. It was the same expression he wore whenever I fixed a problem he didn't want to face. Relief disguised as achievement. Friends came over. Not many, just enough. People who nodded, who avoided questions, who accepted his version without digging too deeply. He told them it was mutual. That we'd grown apart. That I'd taken it well. She stayed close to him, fingers laced through his, territorial and triumphant. She laughed louder than necessary, filling the space with proof she believed she belonged there. What they didn't notice was the stillness beneath it all. No rearranging. No renovations. No permanent changes. Just surface-level claiming of a place they thought was theirs by default. Like children playing house in a structure they didn't understand. That was the part that almost made me feel sorry for her. Almost. Because confidence built on assumption always collapses the same way. Suddenly. Completely. And without warning, the call came the next afternoon, right on schedule, like consequences tend to do when paperwork is involved. I was sitting at a small cafe across town, sunlight spilling through the window, my phone face down beside a cooling cup of coffee. I'd been calm all day, not numb, not shaken, just precise. When the screen lit up with my attorney's name, I answered immediately. Everything is clear, she said without preamble. Very clear. She didn't sound surprised. Professionals rarely are when the facts are this clean. She walked me through it slowly anyway, each sentence tightening the shape of what I already knew. The deed. The prenuptial clauses. The traced funds. The timeline. Ownership wasn't ambiguous. It wasn't emotional. It was documented. He has no legal claim to the property, she continued. You are the sole owner. He's occupying it under marital assumption only, which ended the moment you separated. I closed my eyes, not out of relief, but recognition. The system had done exactly what it was designed to do. Protect preparation. What happens next? I asked. We notify him. Formally. He'll have a limited window to vacate. A pause. Then, softer, do you want to proceed? I thought of her laughter in my kitchen. His voice telling me to take my belongings. The way he'd stood so comfortably inside something he never bothered to understand. Yes, I said. Today. By the time I hung up, my coffee was cold. I left it untouched and stepped outside, letting the city noise ground me. Cars passed. People moved on with their lives. Somewhere across town, two people were still celebrating a victory that had already expired. The notices went out within the hour. Official. Impersonal. unforgiving in their clarity. Legal language doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't need to. I imagined him reading it, confusion giving way to disbelief. The slow realization that the ground under his feet wasn't his at all. That the sentence he'd thrown at me so casually had reversed direction. For the first time since everything began, I smiled without restraint. Not because I was winning. But because the truth was finally about to speak, and it didn't need my voice to be heard. 3 days later, the locks were changed. Not in secret. Not in anger. In daylight, with paperwork signed and authority established. I stood on the sidewalk across the street, hands in my coat pockets, watching the locksmith work with calm precision. He didn't rush. He checked each door twice. Front. Back. Garage. Every click sounded final, not dramatic, just definitive. This wasn't revenge. It was procedure. A sheriff's deputy stood nearby, leaning against his vehicle, casual but present. The kind of presence that tells you this moment is backed by something bigger than emotion. The notice had been served. The timeline had expired. Everything was done exactly by the book. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. Ownership doesn't require supervision. When the locksmith finished, he handed me a small envelope. New keys. Clean. Unused. I thanked him, nodded to the deputy, and turned to leave. That's when I heard shouting. A car screeched to a stop at the curb. He stepped out first, face already flushed, confusion cracking into panic. She followed close behind, eyes darting from the locks to the deputy to me. "What is this?" he demanded, walking toward me like volume could change reality. "You can't do this." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I already did. He laughed, sharp and disbelieving. "This is my house." The deputy straightened slightly. "Sir, according to the documentation, it is not." Silence hit harder than shouting ever could. His mouth opened, then closed again. She grabbed his arm, whispering frantically, the confidence from her photos nowhere to be found. "You said she couldn't do this," she hissed. He turned on me then, anger collapsing into desperation. "You blindsided me." "No," I said calmly. "You underestimated me." The locksmith loaded his tools and drove away, uninterested in the drama he'd just sealed. The deputy waited until they stepped back from the door, then left as well. I stood there alone for a moment, holding the keys. Not shaking. Not triumphant. Just grounded. For years, he'd lived inside my preparation without noticing. Now, he was standing outside it. And for the first time, the house was exactly as quiet as it was supposed to be. That I didn't watch from a distance. I stood where they could see me, not out of cruelty, but clarity. This wasn't something happening to them. It was something happening because of choices they'd made. Consequences deserve witnesses. They tried the door again, as if effort might undo law. He jiggled the handle, then knocked hard, anger replacing logic. She hovered behind him, arms crossed tightly now, her earlier confidence folded in on itself. "This is insane," she muttered, eyes darting toward the neighbors' windows. Curtains shifted. Curiosity always follows collapse. He pulled out his phone, dialing someone, a friend, a lawyer, anyone who might tell him this was a mistake. I could tell from his expression that no one was saying what he wanted to hear. Reality has a way of spreading quickly once it starts. She finally turned to me. "You didn't have to humiliate us," she said, voice trembling but sharp. I met her gaze evenly. "I didn't humiliate you," I replied. "I reclaimed what was mine." The words landed heavier than shouting ever could. Because they were true. Because there was nothing emotional left to debate. They began carrying things out then. Whatever they could grab through the garage after being allowed temporary access, trash bags filled with clothes, mismatched boxes, rushed and careless. The life they thought they were building reduced to what could be lifted in one trip. He kept glancing back at the house, like it might recognize him if he stared long enough. Like it might remember the story he told himself. But houses don't remember feelings. They remember ownership. Her heels clicked angrily against the driveway as she paced, phone pressed to her ear, voice low and frantic. Plans were unraveling faster than she could rewrite them. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel pity either. What I felt was distance, the clean space that appears when something no longer belongs to you. When they finally drove away, the street felt lighter. Quieter. Like it had exhaled. I walked to the front door and unlocked it slowly. Inside, the air was still. Familiar. Honest. The house hadn't changed. Only the illusion of who owned it had. And that illusion was gone for good. He called that night. I knew it was him before I answered. The number was unfamiliar, but desperation has a sound all its own. I let it ring once longer than necessary, then picked up. This has gone too far, he said immediately. No greeting. No apology. Just accusation dressed as panic. You didn't have to throw us out like that. Us. Even now, he couldn't separate his choices from their consequences. You told me to take my belongings, I replied calmly. I did. Silence followed. Then his voice softened, shifted into something almost familiar. We can talk about this. Be reasonable. You don't want this kind of ending. That was the moment it finally broke through. He wasn't afraid of losing me. He was afraid of losing the life he thought he'd inherited by proximity. The comfort. The stability. The structure I'd built around him without charge. I made a mistake, he said quietly. We both did. I almost corrected him. Almost reminded him that betrayal isn't a shared error. But I didn't. I let the weight of his words sit where they belonged. I trusted you, he added, desperation creeping in. You could have warned me. I did, I said. Every time I handled what you didn't want to understand. He exhaled sharply, like someone realizing the ground beneath them had been gone longer than they noticed. What am I supposed to do now? That question used to own me. I used to rush in with answers, solutions, sacrifices. This time, I didn't. That's not my responsibility anymore, I said. His voice cracked then, not with grief, but with loss of control. You're really going to do this? I looked around my quiet home. The walls. The space. The life that finally felt aligned. Yes, I replied. I already have. When I ended the call, there was no rush of emotion. No triumph. Just closure. Sometimes reality doesn't arrive with a scream. Sometimes it comes in a calm voice saying, I'm done fixing what you broke. I returned to the house alone the next morning. No audience. No tension. Just keys, sunlight, and the soft echo of my footsteps crossing the threshold. The door closed behind me with a sound that felt different now, not final, but settled. The rooms were emptier than before, but not hollow. Their absence had cleared something heavy from the air. The silence didn't press down on me. It expanded, like space meant to be used again. I walked slowly, room by room, not inspecting damage or counting losses, but reconnecting. The couch still sat exactly where I'd placed it. The bookshelf held its careful balance. Even the faint indentation on the rug, a result of years of living, felt honest. In the bedroom, the bed was unmade, sheets rumpled in a way that told the truth without apology. I stripped them, folded them, and opened the windows. Fresh air poured in, carrying the scent of early morning and something else, relief. In the kitchen, I brewed coffee and leaned against the counter, listening to the familiar sounds return. The kettle. The cup. The rhythm of normalcy reasserting itself. This wasn't starting over. This was reclaiming. I sat at the dining table with my mug cradled between my hands and let myself breathe fully for the first time in weeks. No one else's expectations pressed in. No performance required. Just ownership, of space, of decisions, of self. I realized then that emptiness isn't always loss. Sometimes it's proof that something harmful finally left. The house didn't feel lonely. It felt aligned. Like it had been waiting for quiet honesty instead of borrowed noise. I stood, stretched, and began making plans, not out of urgency, but possibility. Changes I'd postponed. Ideas I'd shelved. A future shaped deliberately, not reactively. As the sun climbed higher, light filled the rooms more completely than it had in years. And for the first time, the home I built felt entirely, unapologetically mine. People think stories like this end with doors slamming and victories declared. With someone humiliated and someone else triumphant. But that isn't how it really ends. It ends quietly, when no one is watching, and nothing is being proven anymore. An empty house teaches you things noise never could. It teaches you how much of yourself you gave away just to keep things stable. How often you carried weight that wasn't yours because you were capable, dependable, strong. How being needed slowly turned into being used. Walking through those rooms alone, I understood something that had taken years to surface. I wasn't abandoned. I was released. Released from fixing what I didn't break. From explaining my worth to people who benefited from ignoring it. I learned that love without respect isn't love, it's labor. And labor without appreciation becomes invisible until you stop doing it. I learned that boundaries don't make you cruel. They make you clear. And clarity terrifies people who survive on assumption. For a long time, I thought strength meant staying calm while being hurt. Staying quiet while being overlooked. Staying loyal even when loyalty was no longer mutual. But real strength looks different. Real strength looks like preparation no one applauds. It looks like reading every page. Asking every question. Protecting yourself even when you're in love. Especially then. I didn't win because he lost the house. I won because I finally saw myself clearly, not as someone who was replaceable, but as someone who built the ground everyone else stood on. If you're listening to this and something feels off in your life, a relationship, a home, a situation where your effort is expected but your presence is optional, pause. Look closer. There may be more power in your hands than you've been taught to see. Sometimes the loudest justice isn't revenge. It's peace. And sometimes the most important thing an empty house teaches you is that it was never empty because you left. It was empty because you finally took yourself back.